Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Point with Z. Now, for this week, I'd like to conclude our conversations, which we started in the last few episodes on Iran or Persia, or Iran as the peoples of the region call it, and discuss some of the reasons why the Iranian people fell out of love with their regime and why time and time again, at least in the last few years, we saw the people rise up to demand further rights, and some of the calls were to actually abolish the regime and kind of institute a fully democratic regime in Iran, and how these movements would not cease, at least not anytime soon, until real change is implemented in the country and stability is brought back. So I wanted to start with some of the reasons behind the falling out of favor of the Iranian regime. And to start off, based on what we've seen from the several demonstrations that went on in the last few years, the regime is highly unpopular with younger generations of Iranians, which is expected. Younger generations are often less stable. They have less to lose. They're more prone to demand rights. They're more active. They're more motivated to participate in active social justice movements. If you don't have a family to feed, then that becomes a much easier choice. While I'm not necessarily defending the decision of some not to move on some of these some of these social causes, I'm just saying that if you have a family that you're worried about, you're less prone to take action against a regime that has mastered different ways to oppress you and oppress your family. Now, the younger generations are, by default, less entrenched in Shia religious ideology or doctrine. They don't see the world as the enemy. They don't necessarily see a need to change the world. They don't hold that torch where they want to change the world and educate the world and institute a form of justice throughout the world. They also have aspirations that are akin to other people across the globe, especially from that generation. They do have internet access. They could see how the world is changing. They could see the rapid progression across the globe, and they would like to live a similar life to their counterparts in other parts of the world. There's also the fact that the younger generation are starting to realize the futility of Iran's wars in the region. They don't necessarily see Israel as an enemy, at least not as much of an enemy as the regime portrays it to be. They don't see the need to fight Israel. It doesn't have any geographic proximity to Iran that necessarily warrants an immediate response from the Iranian state to kind of neutralize it as a threat. The relationships between Iran and Israel have been relatively stable. They do fight a proxy war here and there, but it's not necessarily a war that is a threat to either one of those countries. They also saw the rapprochement of Israel to other Arab nations and the advancements that Israel has enjoyed in the last few years. They also saw the failure of their regime to protect the Iranian heartland whenever Israel attacked. There has been many raids by Israel on Iranian facilities in the last few years, and they saw how, despite all of the propaganda, the regime actually failed to defend the Iranian heartland against Israel. There's also the fact that they don't see many of the Arab countries as a threat, although they still don't necessarily see them as friends. They don't necessarily perceive Arab leaders as models to be emulated, nor are Arab leaders popular among the Iranian people, but it's just that with the fall of the Iraqi regime of President Saddam Hussein, there is no actual threat to Iran at the moment. There is no Arab leader who's willing or able to threaten Iran at the moment. So they don't necessarily perceive Arab countries as a threat. So for them, it's not as justifiable to intervene in Arab countries as the regime portrays it to be. They also don't have that, again, they don't have that religious fervor. They don't see a need to defend a religious shrine here and there, although I completely disagree with the Iranian regime's rhetoric and propaganda regarding religious shrines here and there, because A, many of those shrines are not Shia shrines, and B, no one touched those Shia shrines, let alone the regimes that existed in those places. So they don't see the need to intervene across the region, not as much as the regime portrays it to be. There's also the social pressure emanating from the changes in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia provided a model of what could and should happen in a place like Iran. It provided a very good example where progress was made very rapidly and social changes were implemented at record speed, and where people are enjoying a much more relaxed social environment, so to speak, and they would like to see similar kind of reforms implemented in Iran. And what that provided as well is an example of changing the unchangeable. So a few years ago, everyone would have thought that such changes in Saudi Arabia would have been impossible, but now that they are possible and they were implemented in a matter of a few years, the Iranian people kind of got their hopes up that a similar change or a similar reform could come to Iran and should come to Iran. There's also the fact that many of those wars that Iran has waged in the region or is raging in the region, and this continuous Iranian adventurism in the region, which brought back a lot of sanctions on Iran, has devastated the economy. If you're not familiar with the geography of the Middle East, Iran has by far the largest economy in the Middle East, prior to the sanctions at least, or at least in terms of potential or opportunity. So there's an immense opportunity cost there. Because of the sanctions, the country is not able to advance and achieve its full economic potential, which could easily outshine many other economies in the region. So the Iranian people, at least the younger generations of the Iranian people, see the potential there, and they realize that there's a lot of missed opportunities where they could have enjoyed a much better quality of life, supported by a much stronger economy, if that regime did not kind of waste the resources and the riches of the country on futile wars across the Middle East. Now, on the other side, on the other side of that equation, there's the massive expansion of the role of the Revolutionary Guard, which became the de facto ruler with the Ayatollah at its head. It became the de facto ruler of the country. There's massive inequality in Iran, and anyone who's associated with the Ayatollah or the Revolutionary Guard is enjoying a much more comfortable life than the rest of the citizens of the country or the rest of the populace. There's massive advantages to aligning oneself to the Ayatollah and his inner circle, and this does not go well, or at least not very well, with the Iranian people, especially with the access to the internet and access to a lot of those unofficial media sites, whereby you see the relatives of the Revolutionary Guard and the clerical class of Iran living abroad a very luxurious life, many of them educated abroad, many of them not adhering to the Islamic values that Iran is trying to impose, or at least the Iranian regime is trying to impose, and many of them enjoying a quality of life much better than that lived by the rest of the populace in Iran. There's also the fact that the Iranian regime tried to play a special card, so to speak, whereby they try to combine Iranian nationalism with Shia religious fervor and kind of combine the two and generate this whole new role for the Iranian people where they become the defenders of the Shia religious sect or the Shia religious movement across the region. And I believe that failed miserably. While it kind of gained a little bit of support at first, the younger generation did not really adhere to that ideology, did not really see itself as the torch bearer for Shia causes across the globe. And I think that policy eventually failed, while the Iranian identity, national identity, is alive and well and strong. The Shia kind of fervor is not as well received by the younger generation, and that kind of decoupling of the two kind of deprived the regime of a major card that it was trying to play. So all of these factors combined kind of aggravated the grievances of the younger generation. It intensified their hatred for the regime, and it intensified their desire to kind of break away from this circle of oppression and gain their full rights akin to other people across the region. Mainly when they look across the border, they see Azerbaijan a successful economy. They see Turkey a successful economy to some extent, well, at least until recently. And they see Saudi Arabia reforming rapidly into a different social model. And they see the UAE, Qatar, and other Gulf nations as successful models as well, whereby if they look at all of the countries where Iran has been present, they see a decline in a complete and utter destruction of the economy, and a decline in moral values, and a decline in the country's ability to progress forward. So I hope this provided you with a quick overview of why the Iranian people don't see a bright future within the current regime or the current model, and why they would like to break free out of this cycle, as I mentioned earlier. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.